Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new explainer. Today, we're taking a look at one of the most famous structures in human history, the Temple of Solomon. But we're not just going to look at it as a historical or religious monument. No, we're going to look at it as a machine, a highly sophisticated architectural acoustic machine that was designed for a very specific, honestly kind of mind-bending purpose. So let's dive right into this.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the ancient acoustic puzzle, tuning the temple, hacking the human brain, two zones of consciousness, and we'll wrap up with the Frank Lloyd Wright vision.
All right, part one, the ancient acoustic puzzle. To really understand the genius of the Temple of Solomon, we have to kind of strip away the myth for a second and treat its physical dimensions as a cold, hard physics problem. If we take the ancient scriptural texts, which measure the building in cubits, and transpose those into modern feet using the historical standard of 18 inches per cubit, a fascinating structural reality emerges. The main structure of the temple was exactly 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. But right there in the middle, the inner sanctuary, the famous Holy of Holies, was a perfect geometric cube, measuring exactly 30 by 30 by 30 feet. Now, that 30-foot cube gives us this exact number, 18.83 hertz. In acoustic physics, when sound waves bounce back and forth between parallel walls, they create what are called standing waves. Because the Holy of Holies was a perfect cube, the length, width, and height resonances all collapsed into the exact same frequency, 18.83 hertz, along with its first harmonic at 37.67 hertz. Acousticians call this catastrophic modal degeneracy, which honestly is really just a highly technical way of saying it's an acoustician's absolute worst nightmare. So, the crucial takeaway here is that a raw stone cube of this size creates severe acoustic pressure rings and destructive standing wave nulls. If you were to literally stand inside a 30-foot bare stone cube and try to speak or chant, your vocal articulation would be completely masked by a muddy, low-frequency, reverberating mess. Without some kind of brilliant intervention, the Holy of Holies would have been completely unusable for speech or ritual. Which brings us to part two, tuning the temple. This is where we hit the real aha moment of our mystery. Knowing that a giant stone box is an acoustic disaster, how exactly did the ancient builders engineer a cure? Well, to answer that, we need to understand a principle of acoustic physics known as the Helmholtz resonator. You know when you blow across the top of an empty glass bottle to make a tone? That's a Helmholtz resonator. It's basically an enclosed volume of air connected to the outside through a neck or an opening. Depending on the volume of the cavity and the size of that opening, it acts like a sponge, absorbing or amplifying very specific acoustic frequencies. Keep this principle in mind, because it's going to change how we see everything in this ancient building. It turns out the biblical accounts describe several distinct architectural features that actually doubled as ingenious acoustic cures. The temple was wrapped in multi-tiered storage rooms called tizalat. These weren't just for storing grain, guys. Connected by narrow doorways and windows, they acted as massive distributed Helmholtz bass traps, sucking up all that muddy low-frequency energy. Inside, the walls weren't bare stone. They were clad in porous cedar wood with air gaps behind them, which acted as diaphragmatic panel absorbers. Even the intricate carvings of palm trees and cherubim weren't just there to look pretty. They were complex geometric diffusers that scattered harsh flutter echoes. And the famous gold leaf? Pure stone reflects too much. Pure wood absorbs too much. But then gold leaf over compliant wood seals the porous grain, creating a perfectly controlled reflection profile optimized for chanting. They essentially turned a monolithic stone building into a highly tuned acoustic instrument. Okay, part three, hacking the human brain. But you have to ask yourself, why go to all this trouble? Why tune a building so precisely? To figure that out, we have to shift our focus from the physical building to the human body to explore the true motive behind this engineering. The answer lies in a biological phenomenon called neural entrainment. This is the synchronization of human brainwave oscillations to an external rhythmic stimulus. Think about how you can physically feel the heavy bass vibrating in your chest at a concert. Now imagine that on a much deeper subconscious level. The massive wavelengths of extremely low-frequency sound, or infrasound, don't just hit your eardrums. They're so large they physically couple with your skeletal structure, your organs, and your nervous system, quite literally forcing your brain activity to phase lock to the vibration of the room. Now, as a quick refresher, human brain waves are categorized into distinct bands. You've got delta for deep sleep, theta for deep meditation and trance, alpha for relaxed, calm alertness, beta for active stressed cognition and hyperfocus, and gamma for peak processing. Each band dictates how you perceive reality, how relaxed or alert you are, and exactly how your autonomic nervous system behaves. And here is where it gets crazy. When we do the math on the temple's dimensions, an absolutely stunning correlation appears. The fundamental frequencies of the building's main spaces, 6.28 Hz for the length, 12.56 Hz for the height, and 18.83 Hz for the width and the inner cube, align perfectly with those human brainwave bands. Driven by the chanting and the blowing of silver trumpets, the architecture amplified this exact infrasound. It created a resonant feedback loop that physically steered the nervous systems of everyone inside. Moving right along to part 4, 2 zones of consciousness. So the experience wasn't actually the same for everyone in the building. The layout created a sort of dual narrative, establishing a strict hierarchy of consciousness depending on where you were standing. Let's look at the contrast. For the high priest, standing alone in the inner cube of the Holy of Holies, the standing wave is 18.83 Hz. That sits right at the high end of the beta band. The result? Intense hypervigilance, acute sensory gating, and extreme focus. Literally exactly what you need for a high-stakes, solitary ritual performance. Meanwhile, the congregation out in a larger main sanctuary experienced something entirely different. The acoustic modes there are 6.28 and 12.56 Hz, which pushes the crowd into a dominant theta and alpha state. The result for them is a unified, deep contemplative trance and a shared sense of collective awe. And these spaces weren't just isolated bubbles, they interacted brilliantly. The acoustic energy pumped from the main hall right through the veil and into the Holy of Holies. And this brilliantly illustrates the math at play here. Because when you subtract the 6.28 Hz drone of the main hall from the 18.83 Hz resonance of the inner cube, you get an intermodulation tone of exactly 12.55 Hz. This falls smack in the middle of the alpha band, locking the entire massive architectural volume into one harmonically unified rhythmic pulse. It functioned literally like a giant pipe organ. The outer hall was the deep bassline engine, generating a calm theta trance, while the inner sanctum acted as the high-pressure beta reed, keeping the priests razor sharp. Finally, part 5, the Frank Lloyd Wright vision. This kind of fusion of space, sound, and the human mind is a timeless architectural challenge. So it got us thinking, how would a modern master approach this exact same acoustic challenge today? Let's apply the principles of the legendary Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright wouldn't just copy a monolithic stone box, right? He'd reinterpret the space using his signature concept of compression and release. Picture this. The journey would start with a low, heavily shadowed entrance. As you move into the vestibule, you'd feel this intense physical compression. Then, the moment you cross the threshold into the main sanctuary, the space would dramatically explode upward, with a massive cantilevered roof that just appears to float magically above the walls. Wright championed what he called Usonian organic architecture and the absolute honesty of materials. So instead of importing cedar, he would likely use battered stone plinths of local Jerusalem limestone, making the building look like it was just seamlessly growing right out of Mount Moriah, accented with his signature Cherokee red concrete. Instead of covering everything in gold leaf, he'd use integrated textile blocks cast with ancient motifs and perforated copper screens that naturally patina green over time. As the sun shifted throughout the day, these copper screens would cast complex, dappled patterns, what he called light screens, creating breathtaking sacred ornamentation out of pure light and geometry. And of course, instead of ancient braziers, he'd undoubtedly install modern radiant floor heating beneath the vast stone slabs to organically warm the congregants. So, how would Wright solve the acoustic and spatial nightmare of that 30-foot windowless cube? Well, the Holy of Holies would no longer be a dark, suffocating box. Wright would place it on a raised, elevated level, designed as a vertical, louvered tower of light. Filtered through gold anodized glass, a single, vertical shaft of light would descend directly onto the ark. It beautifully symbolizes the Shekinah glory, while completely reimagining the space through organic, modern principles. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder. Knowing what we know now about the dimensional physics, the Helmholtz space traps, and the undeniable mathematical alignment with human brainwave entrainment, was the Temple of Solomon merely a static monument to history, or was it, in fact, the ancient world's most sophisticated machine for engineering human consciousness? Honestly, the precision is just too striking to ignore. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I hope you found this ancient acoustic detective story as fascinating as I do. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will catch you in the next one.